She took everything from me: my home, my comfort, even my sense of belonging. I never thought my own sister would become the reason I cried myself to sleep on a stranger's couch. Yet, 1 week later, she was the one standing in front of me, begging me to open the door. If I'm being honest, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just close it again. But before I get there, I need to start from the beginning. The day our parents left us everything, and somehow we still managed to lose each other. When I think of my childhood, I don't remember luxury or big vacations. I remember our little white house with peeling paint and a wooden porch that creaked every time someone stepped on it. I remember the smell of Mom's roses drifting through the open kitchen window and the sound of Dad's laugh echoing down the hallway. That house wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was love built into wood and stone. After they passed, the house became more than a building. It was their memory, their presence, the last piece of them I could still touch. I thought Rachel felt the same. She's my older sister, 5 years older, and for most of my life, she played the role of the confident one. I was the emotional one, the sensitive one, who cried during movies and wrote poems in old notebooks. Rachel rolled her eyes at me, but always had my back, or so I believed. The day of the reading of the will, I remember sitting in the lawyer's office with my hands clenched around the hem of my dress. The room smelled of old paper and polished wood. Rachel sat beside me, calm, polished, tapping her nails on the table like she already knew what to expect. When the lawyer said the house would be shared equally between us, I felt relief. It seemed fair. We'd both get to keep a piece of what we loved most. For a few months, things went smoothly. We decided to move in together, mostly because it felt wrong to let the place sit empty. I told myself this could bring us closer, maybe even heal the old distance that always existed between us. In the beginning, it almost did. We painted the living room walls, planted new flowers in Mom's garden, and even laughed while trying to fix the leaky kitchen faucet. For a short while, I believed we were rebuilding more than the house. We were rebuilding our bond. But small cracks began to show. They always do, don't they? It started with little comments. Rachel would sigh and say things like, "You should really think about getting your own place someday." Or, "It's hard to live with someone who doesn't pay half the mortgage." The words stung because they weren't true. There was no mortgage. The house was ours, free and clear, left to us by our parents. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she needed space. Weeks passed and her tone hardened. She stopped eating dinner with me. She stopped saying good morning. Sometimes I'd come home and find that she'd rearranged furniture or thrown away things that belonged to me. Small items at first, but they meant something. One night, I heard her on the phone whispering, "She'll move out soon. I'll make sure of it." My heart sank, but I convinced myself I misunderstood. Because who wants to believe that their own sister is plotting against them? Then came the morning everything shattered. I had worked a late shift and came home exhausted, dreaming only of my bed. But when I reached the porch, I froze. My belongings were stacked in cardboard boxes like garbage waiting for pickup. Clothes, books, photo albums, even the old lamp Mom gave me for my first apartment. All of it dumped outside. A folded note was taped to the front door. "Emily, this is for the best. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Rachel." I just stood there. For a few seconds, my mind couldn't process what my eyes saw. My throat tightened, and my hands began to shake. I knocked, then pounded, calling her name. No answer. Through the window, I could see the lights were on, meaning she was home, but she wouldn't open the door. That's when the truth hit me like cold water. My own sister had kicked me out of our parents' home. The next few days blurred into one long stretch of disbelief. I stayed with my friend Mia, sleeping on her couch, trying to understand what had happened. Every time I replayed it in my mind, it made less sense. I texted Rachel. She didn't reply. I called. She declined every call. I told myself maybe she was having a breakdown. Maybe she'd come to her senses. But a week later, an envelope arrived at Mia's apartment with my name neatly typed on the front. Inside were legal documents. Rachel had filed to transfer full ownership of the house into her name. And at the bottom of the papers was something that made my blood run cold. My signature. I knew instantly it wasn't mine. The loops, the angle, even the way that you curved, it was all wrong. She had forged it. My sister had actually forged my name to steal the house. At first, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to tear the papers to pieces, pretend none of it was real. Another part wanted to show up at the house and scream at her until she broke. But deep down, I knew yelling wouldn't fix anything. So instead, I did something Rachel never expected. I went to see a lawyer. His name was Mr. Jacobs, an older man with kind eyes and a quiet voice. I remember sitting in his office as he read through the documents. After a few minutes, he leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and said gently, "Emily, this signature isn't yours. It's a forgery. If we can prove that, not only will her claim fail, but you might gain full ownership." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope flicker. Maybe justice wasn't completely out of reach. We started gathering everything: old messages, emails, copies of the original will, any proof that I'd never agreed to sign anything away. Every night, I stayed up late at Mia's kitchen table, surrounded by piles of paper and empty coffee cups. It was exhausting, but anger kept me awake. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the memory of my parents, for the love that home represented. One evening, as I went through an old box of letters from Mom, I found something strange. A faded yellow envelope labeled, "To our girls." Inside was an older version of the will written in my father's handwriting. I didn't think much of it at first, but I took it to Mr. Jacobs the next morning. He read it carefully, then looked at me with wide eyes. "Emily," he said, "this changes everything."
The next morning, the air was thick with the quiet sounds of a home that had not yet fully woken. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, steam curling up like whispered thoughts. Milo, the orange cat, sat on the windowsill, staring out at the gray morning sky. His paws were tucked neatly beneath him, but his tail twitched, slowly, anxiously. It had been 2 weeks since Mama had fallen ill. The once bright and lively presence, who moved around the house like sunlight, had now become a shadow, frail and tired. The kitten, now a little older, still tried to wake her every morning, pressing his tiny paw against her face, mewing softly. Sometimes she'd smile weakly, whisper his name. Other times, she didn't wake right away. Milo watched over her closely. Every sound from her breathing made him tense. Every cough sent a wave of fear through his small, furry body. He didn't understand sickness in the way humans did, but he understood absence. He understood what it meant to lose warmth. And that fear kept him awake most nights. When the rain began that afternoon, Milo padded quietly into the small kitchen. His eyes landed on the half-empty bowl of soup that Mama hadn't touched. He sniffed it, then looked back toward the bed. Something in him stirred, a feeling of helplessness, but also determination. He remembered the times Mama used to cook, how the smell of fish broth would fill the air, how she'd hum as she stirred the pot, and how she'd always set aside a small portion just for him. Cooking had always been her joy, her rhythm, her way of showing love. And now, there was no hum, no smell of warmth in the house, only silence. That silence, heavy and cold, was what broke Milo's heart the most. He wanted to bring it back. That night, as the moon rose high above the rooftops, the little orange cat made his first brave decision. He jumped down from the window, his paws making soft sounds on the floor, and made his way toward the stove. He sat there for a long while, just watching the pot, the utensils, the closed jar of rice on the shelf. He didn't know how to use them, but he had seen Mama do it hundreds of times. Somewhere deep in his tiny heart, he believed he could try. The next morning, while Mama still slept, Milo began his mission. The kitchen was large compared to his small body, and everything looked like a mountain to climb: the counter, the shelves, Even the handle of the pot seemed out of reach. He climbed onto a chair, his claws scraping against the wood. Then, with a determined leap, he made it to the counter. He wobbled, almost fell, but caught himself by hooking his paw onto a dish towel. The world from up there looked enormous, but he felt strong. The first challenge was finding the right ingredients. He remembered the smell of the soup Mama used to make, something with rice, fish, and vegetables. He sniffed around the jars until he found the familiar scent. His tail flicked with excitement. He pushed one of the small rice jars toward the edge of the counter. It fell with a loud clatter, spilling grains across the floor. Milo froze. His heart pounded, but Mama didn't wake. He sighed softly and jumped down, inspecting the tiny white grains scattered across the floor like snow. He pawed at them, feeling the texture. Then he began to push some into a small bowl with his nose. It took time, more time than he thought, but finally he had a small amount ready. Then came the water. He looked at the kettle, which was heavy and hot, and decided against it. Instead, he found a small metal cup beside the sink. With a careful tilt of his head and a lot of splashing, he managed to fill it halfway. The stove was the hardest part. He had no idea how to make it work. He meowed at it, pawed at the knobs, and even tried to bite one, but nothing happened. The stove just sat there, cold and stubborn. Frustration welled up inside him. His whiskers twitched, and he let out a small, sad cry. He wanted to help her. He wanted to bring back the warm smell of cooking, the sound of love, but everything seemed impossible. That's when he heard a soft voice. Milo? He turned quickly. Mama was awake. She was watching him from the bed, her tired eyes gentle, but filled with surprise. "What are you doing, my little chef?" she whispered. Milo froze, his ears flattened. He meowed softly, almost ashamed. She smiled weakly and coughed. You're trying to cook?" Her voice was frail but warm, and for a moment the silence broke. She slowly pushed herself up, her hands trembling. "Come here, my sweet boy." Milo ran to her side, rubbing his head against her arm. She stroked his fur, her touch light as a feather. "You silly cat," she said softly. "You don't have to take care of me." But he looked up at her, his golden eyes shimmering with something she couldn't ignore: love, worry, and determination. In that moment, she realized something. She wasn't alone. Even though her body was weak, something about her effort, her clumsy, pure attempt to help, sparked something inside her heart, a flicker of strength she thought she had lost. She leaned down and whispered, "All right, my little cook, let's do it together." That evening, the kitchen was alive again. Not perfect, not fast, but alive. Milo sat beside her, watching as she stirred the pot slowly. Every so often, she let him paw at a spoon or nudge a bowl closer. They worked as a team. The smell of soup once again filled the room, soft, rich, full of memory. And as they sat together on the floor afterwards, sharing a quiet meal, Milo purred softly. The world outside was still gray, but inside that small kitchen, it felt like spring again. For the first time in weeks, Mama smiled fully. And in that smile, Milo saw hope. But deep down, he also knew something he couldn't name. Her strength wasn't fully back. The light was still fragile. And though the warmth had returned for now, a shadow still lingered behind her eyes. That night, as she fell asleep by the fire, Milo stayed awake, watching over her, his tail wrapped tightly around his body, as if holding himself together. Because even in that moment of peace, he could feel it. The story wasn't over yet. Something bigger was coming, something that would test them both. The days that followed were softer, slower, like sunlight filtered through thin curtains. Mama was still weak, but the color had begun to return to her face. She moved carefully around the kitchen, and every time she did, Milo followed at her heels like a small orange shadow. In the mornings, he would nudge her awake with gentle purrs. When she sat up,
Still drowsy and coughing, he'd leap to the windowsill and stretch toward the dawn as if to greet it for her. She'd smile and say, "Good morning, my little helper." It became their ritual, the slow mornings, the quiet moments, the fragile normal returning bit by bit. But beneath that fragile peace, there was still a sense of uncertainty. Some days, Mama's hands would tremble so much she could barely hold the spoon. Other days, she would stare out the window too long, lost in thought, her eyes glimmering with worry. Milo saw it all. He didn't understand illness, but he understood sadness. And sadness had a smell, faint, heavy, like rain-soaked wool. So he worked hard to change it. Every day he would bring her small gifts, sometimes a fallen leaf, sometimes a shiny button he found under the couch. Once, a single pink flower from the garden outside. He would place it on her lap, sit beside her, and wait. At first, she laughed softly at his strange offerings. "Oh, Milo, what am I supposed to do with this?" she'd say, holding up the crumpled leaf. But he'd just blink slowly, that slow, loving cat blink that means, "I care." And every time, her laughter lingered just a little longer. The laughter was healing. It filled the quiet corners of the house, the ones that used to echo with silence. Sometimes, when she was strong enough, she would hum again while stirring soup. Milo would listen closely, his ears twitching in rhythm with the melody. He didn't know the words, but he knew what it meant: warmth, life, love returning. One evening, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic on the roof. The fire burned low, casting long, swaying shadows on the walls. Mama sat in her chair by the window, knitting with slow, careful motions. Milo was curled up on her lap, eyes half closed, purring in sync with her heartbeat. For a while, neither of them spoke. The world was at peace. Then Mama whispered, almost to herself, "I used to dream about opening a little cafe, you know." Milo's ear flicked, but he stayed still. She smiled faintly. "A small one, maybe with bright curtains and plants by the window. People would come in, and I'd make soup. Warm, gentle soup, like the one my mother used to make." Her voice softened as she spoke, fading into memory. But dreams get smaller when life gets harder. Milo opened his eyes. He lifted his head and looked at her. His tail moved once, slow and thoughtful. He didn't understand her words, but he understood her tone, that quiet ache that hides behind hope. She looked down at him, smiling through the weariness. "You'd have loved it there, my little chef. You'd sit by the window and watch everyone who came in." He meowed softly, as if to agree. That night, when she fell asleep, Milo stayed by the window, watching the rain. His reflection in the glass looked older somehow, as if the small kitten had grown into something more, a guardian. He wanted to make her dream real. Somehow. Days turned into weeks, and the house began to feel alive again. Mama started cooking a little more. The scent of bread and soup filled the air once more, blending with the hum of quiet music. Sometimes she'd even talk to him as if he were her little apprentice. "Milo, pass me the spoon." "Milo, don't touch that. It's hot." "Milo, you're going to make me laugh again, aren't you?" He'd tilt his head, meow proudly, and swish his tail as if he understood every word. But one morning, things changed. She woke up later than usual. The sunlight was already high, spilling across the floor in golden lines. Milo waited by the bed, patient at first, then restless. When she finally stirred, it wasn't with her usual gentle smile. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven. She sat up slowly, clutching her chest. Milo meowed anxiously. "I'm okay," she whispered, "just tired." But she wasn't okay. The next few days blurred together. She barely ate. Her steps grew smaller, slower. The humming stopped again. And the smell of medicine filled the air. Sharp, sterile, out of place in their warm little home. Milo stayed by her side every moment.
He brought no more flowers or buttons. Instead, he simply stayed, watching, waiting, guarding. His eyes followed every move she made, as if by looking hard enough he could keep her from fading. One afternoon, as the Lun lay resting, a neighbor came by, an older woman with kind eyes and a heavy coat. She said, "I've been worried. You shouldn't be alone like this." Mama smiled weakly. "I have Milo." The woman chuckled. "Ah, yes, your little guardian." Then she glanced at the kitchen, where the dishes were unwashed and the air hung heavy with silence. She said softly, "Let me help." And she did. She came by every few days after that, bringing bread, milk, and sometimes a warm blanket. Milo didn't like her at first. He would hide under the table, his golden eyes peeking out suspiciously. But over time, he grew used to her. She had a kind smell, like herbs and wool. Still, even with help, the weight in the house was growing. Mama was fighting something invisible, something deep inside that no one could see. One evening, when the sun was bleeding orange through the window, she sat quietly on the floor beside Milo. Her fingers traced his fur slowly. "You know," she whispered, "you saved me, little one. You reminded me what love feels like." He purred softly, rubbing against her hand. "But," she hesitated, her voice trembling, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Milo froze. The tone in her voice. It wasn't weakness this time. It was surrender. He looked up at her, wide-eyed. His tail flicked anxiously. He meowed once, sharply, as if trying to argue. She smiled sadly. "Shh, don't worry, my little chef. Even if I'm gone, I'll always be with you. Right here." She touched her chest. "In your heart." The words meant nothing to him then, but the way she said them, the weight behind them carved itself deep into his memory. That night, the house was quiet again. The rain came and went, tapping lightly against the roof like fingers drumming time. Milo stayed awake, curled beside her. He could feel the uneven rhythm of her breathing, the faint warmth fading slowly. And as the first light of dawn crept into the room, something inside him broke. The world, once filled with the smell of soup and the sound of her laughter, suddenly felt too big, too empty. He meowed softly, then louder, calling for her, but she didn't answer. The fire had gone out, and so had she. The morning after Mama's passing didn't feel real. The world outside went on as usual. Birds chirped, the sun crept up from the horizon, and somewhere down the road a truck rumbled past. But inside the house, everything was still. Too still. Milo sat by the edge of the bed, his golden fur catching the light, his eyes fixed on the spot where she used to be. Her scent still lingered family, that mix of lavender and old paper, but it was fading fast. He pressed his nose into her pillow, searching, trying to hold on to what was left. He didn't understand death, not in the way humans do. All he knew was that she wasn't moving anymore, and her voice, the one that could fill the room with warmth, was gone. The neighbor woman came that afternoon. She opened the door softly, her steps careful, her voice low. "Oh, Milo," she whispered when she saw him sitting there. She covered her mouth and began to cry quietly. The house filled with people later, voices she didn't know, shoes scraping on the floor, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Every unfamiliar sound made him flinch. He hid beneath the bed for a long time, trembling, as strangers carried away the things that smelled like Mama. Then, one by one, the voices left. The door closed, the light dimmed, and Milo was alone. Days passed, maybe weeks. He didn't eat much. He didn't purr. He wandered through the rooms, searching for the ghost of a sound, a breath, a heartbeat. The fire remained cold. The windows stayed shut, and dust began to settle like a soft blanket over everything. At night, he'd sleep on her favorite chair, curling up where she used to sit, staring at the doorway, waiting for her to return. Sometimes in the silence, he thought he could still hear her voice humming softly, but it was only the wind. Then one evening, something changed. He was sitting by the window when he noticed a figure standing by the garden gate. A young woman, her hair tied back, her face pale and nervous. She looked around, clutching a bag close to her chest. When she stepped closer, Milo recognized her scent. Faint, familiar, but buried under years of absence. It was her daughter, the one who had left long ago. She opened the door and stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the quiet room. "Mom?" she whispered, though she already knew. When her gaze fell on Milo, she froze. He stared back, his golden eyes wide and watchful. For a moment, neither moved. Then she dropped to her knees, her bag falling to the floor, and covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, I wasn't here! I wasn't here!" Milo didn't move. He didn't understand her words, but he understood her pain, the kind that poured out like rain, unstoppable and raw. After a long time, she reached out a trembling hand toward him. "You were here, weren't you? You stayed with her." He hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. He pressed his nose against her fingers. They smelled of salt and tears. She let out a breath that was half a cry, half a sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. In that moment, something between them shifted. Two lonely hearts, one human, one feline, both broken by the same loss, quietly began to find each other. The woman, whose name was Clara, stayed for days. She cleaned the rooms, opened the curtains, and let the light back in. She sorted through boxes, whispering to the air as if her mother could still hear. Milo followed her everywhere, not because he trusted her yet, but because the sound of footsteps meant the house was alive again. Every morning, she'd pour milk into a bowl for him and say, "Good morning, Milo." Every night, she'd sit by the window, just like her mother used to, and stare into the dark. Sometimes she'd cry quietly. Sometimes she'd talk to him, stories of the past, regrets, small confessions meant for no one else. "I left because I thought I needed to find my own life, but I never realized she was my life," she said once, her voice trembling. Milo would curl up beside her, purring softly, as if trying to tell her he understood. But healing isn't simple. The house may have been brighter, but the shadows still lingered. Clara found her mother's notebook one evening, a small, worn book hidden in the drawer beside the bed. The pages were filled with recipes, scribbled notes, and small drawings of herbs and soups. At the end of the book, she found a letter. It was addressed to her. Her hands shook as she opened it. Milo sat by her feet, watching her face as she read. "Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've finally come home. I want you to know I never stopped loving you, not once. I only wish we'd had more time. I don't want you to feel guilty. Life pulls us in strange directions, but if you can, please take care of Milo. He has a heart as big as any person I've ever met. And maybe, through him, you can still feel a piece of me." By the time she reached the end, tears had stained the paper. Milo looked up at her, blinking slowly, that same gentle blink his mama had once given him. Clara smiled through her tears. "I will, Mom, I promise." From that night on, Milo had someone again.
Someone who spoke softly, who filled the silence with warmth, who brought the smell of soup back into the air. And slowly, the house began to feel like home again. Not the same as before, but something new, something tender. One morning, Clara opened the window wide, letting the sunlight pour in. She turned to Milo and said, "You know what, little guy? Maybe we could still make her dream come true." Milo tilted his head. "The cafe," she said, smiling faintly. "Mom always wanted one, remember? I found her recipes. We could, I don't know, we could try." The idea hung in the air, fragile but alive. She spent the following weeks gathering her mother's old things, repairing what she could, painting walls, rearranging furniture. The house began to transform, not into a new place, but into a living memory. Milo followed her everywhere, watching curiously as she worked. When she painted, he'd sit by the open window, tail swaying in rhythm with the brushstrokes. When she cooked, he'd sit on the counter, sniffing the air, meowing softly, as if giving his approval. And when she was tired, she'd sit on the floor beside him, resting her head on her knees, whispering, "We're getting there, Milo. Slowly." The day she finally lit the old "open" sign by the window, she stood back and smiled. "There," she said softly, "for her." The cafe was small, just a few tables, a counter, and shelves lined with potted herbs, but it was warm, inviting. The first customers who came in looked around smiling at the smell of soup and fresh bread. And there, sitting by the window, was Milo, the little orange cat who had once watched over his sick mama, now watching over everyone who walked in. People began to notice him. They'd come not just for the soup, but for the cat with the calm golden eyes. He became the heart of the cafe, the quiet symbol of love that never fades. But sometimes, when the lights dimmed and the door closed, Clara would look over and see him staring at the empty chair by the window, the one where her mother used to sit. And she knew, in that silent moment, that he remembered, that both of them did. The cafe settled into its rhythm slowly, like a gentle heartbeat finding its pace. Every morning, Clara would open the windows to let in the cool, fragrant air, and Milo would jump onto the windowsill, surveying his little kingdom. The smell of baking bread drifted out into the street, weaving through the quiet neighborhood. Clara had never thought she'd be able to run a cafe, not alone, not after everything. But Milo, in his quiet, persistent way, reminded her every day that she could. He had survived the loss, and so could she. The first few customers trickled in hesitantly, unsure what to expect from a tiny cafe with a small orange cat in the window. But Milo had a way of welcoming them without saying a word. He'd brush against their legs, purr softly, and tilt his head in curiosity. People smiled immediately, drawn not just to the food, but to the warmth that radiated from him. One morning, a young boy with a mop of curly hair came in with his mother. The boy froze when he saw Milo perched on the counter. "Mom?" he whispered. "Is that a talking cat?" Milo blinked slowly at him, unimpressed. Then he jumped down gracefully and patted over, letting the boy reach out a hand. The boy giggled, and Milo nudged it gently with his head. Clara watched from behind the counter, smiling softly. Milo had a way of making the world feel softer, kinder. He didn't just survive the past, he healed the present. Weeks passed. The cafe grew quietly, steadily. People came not just for the food, but for the calm, comforting presence of Milo and the warmth Clara put into every dish. She had learned her mother's recipes by heart, adjusting them slightly, but always keeping the essence of Mama's love in
every bowl of soup, every loaf of bread, every cup of tea. One rainy afternoon, a woman came in and sat quietly in the corner, sipping her tea slowly. She watched Milo with interest, her eyes following his every move. After a while, she approached Clara. "Your mother," she said softly, "she was my friend. She always spoke of you. And him." She gestured at Milo. "I never imagined the two of you could carry her spirit so beautifully." Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, swallowing back tears. "It's all Milo," she whispered. "He reminded me of her every day. He stayed when I didn't think anyone could." The woman smiled, her eyes warm. Sometimes the smallest hearts carry the biggest strength. That night, after closing, Clara sat on the floor of the cafe, Milo curled up on her lap. She traced the fur on his back, her fingers gentle, slow. She said softly, "You know, little one, I think we're finally okay. Not perfect, but okay." Milo purred, tilting his head as if he understood. The days turned into months. The cafe became a part of the neighborhood, a small beacon of comfort. Milo had a favorite spot by the window where he could watch people pass by, and he never missed a day of greeting Clara in the morning. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from a distant relative Clara hadn't met, a cousin who had known Mama well. The letter spoke of memories, of gratitude for keeping her mother's legacy alive, and of admiration for Milo, the little orange cat who had become the heart of the house. Clara read it aloud to Milo, her voice soft but full of emotion. She said, "They remember her, and so do we. Thanks to you, Milo, we've made this house, this cafe, feel alive again." Milo purred, pressing his head against her chest. Not everything was perfect. There were days when Clara still felt a hollow ache in her chest, moments when memories would hit her like waves, leaving her gasping and trembling. Milo would nuzzle her, stay close, and somehow the ache would ease. Not gone, but softened. Sometimes he would even sit by the empty chair staring at it for long moments. Clara didn't need to ask him what he was thinking. She could see it in his eyes. He remembered Mama, the way she smelled, the warmth she carried, the love she left behind. One spring morning, Clara planted flowers in the little garden outside the cafe. Milo helped in his own way, pawing at the soil, chasing a stray butterfly, sometimes stepping carefully among the flowers as if to inspect their progress. The cafe smelled of blossoms and fresh bread. The neighborhood felt brighter, lighter, and inside, Milo and Clara sat together, the world finally quiet enough for healing. Clara spoke softly as she looked at him. "You saved me, little one. I don't know how I would have made it without you." Milo blinked slowly. The way he looked at her, calm, steady, full of understanding, it was enough. No words were needed. Life settled into a gentle rhythm, one they both cherished. The loss was never forgotten, but it no longer consumed them. Instead, it became part of the story, a thread woven into every loaf of bread, every cup of tea, every quiet evening by the fire. One evening, as Clara closed up the cafe, she noticed the light on the counter where Milo usually sat. He wasn't there. Panic prickled at her chest until she saw him crouched by the small kitchen window, staring out at the stars. She approached slowly. "What are you looking at, little one?" she asked. Milo didn't turn. He just sat there, still and thoughtful, his tail wrapped around his body. Then Clara understood. He was remembering Mama, the warmth of her touch, the smell of her cooking, the quiet moments they had shared. He wasn't sad, not exactly. He was honoring what had been, while holding on to what now was. Clara smiled, sitting beside him. She said softly, "You will never forget her, will you?" Milo blinked slowly at her, and in that blink, she felt it. The answer was yes, and that was okay. Because some love never fades.
Some hearts never let go, and sometimes the smallest creature can carry the heaviest memories and turn them into something beautiful.
The cafe had settled into its rhythm completely now. Mornings began with the soft chime of the door, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the air, and Milo perched loyally by the counter, watching as Clara prepared the first cups of tea. People came not just for food, but for the atmosphere, warm, gentle, and quiet. There was comfort in the small space, and even strangers felt drawn into its calm. Milo had become part of that comfort, the silent guardian whose golden eyes seemed to see into every person's heart. Clara had learned something important during the months of rebuilding. The heart of the home, the essence of love, wasn't tied to walls or furniture. It was in the actions, the care, the persistence of those who remain. And Milo embodied that lesson every single day. One rainy afternoon, a local school teacher came in with a group of children. She introduced them to Milo slowly, unsure of how he'd react. But Milo, ever patient and wise beyond his small size, allowed each child to approach him. He sniffed gently, purred, and even batted a small paw toward a particularly shy little boy. The children laughed. They told Milo their secrets, their worries, even their little dreams for the future. And in that laughter, Clara saw something profound. Her mother's spirit, the warmth she had left behind, was living again. It had taken another form, not exactly the same, but just as meaningful. Even the quietest moments in the cafe carried echoes of the past. The old recipes, the way the chairs were arranged, the smell of the soup, all subtle reminders of the life that had been lost and the love that had endured. Clara often caught Milo staring at the corner where her mother's favorite chair had once been. He didn't seem sad exactly, more contemplative, reflective. It was as if he was bridging the past and the present, carrying her memory forward while guiding Clara in the present. Neighbors began to visit more often. They shared stories of her mother, of the warmth she had once brought to the community. They came with flowers, sometimes with small gifts for Milo, and occasionally with just a word of thanks for Clara for keeping her mother's love alive. The bond between Clara and Milo deepened in ways that words could barely capture. They became inseparable. She spoke to him as though he understood every nuance of human emotion, which in some ways he did. Milo responded not with words, but with presence, with patience, with unspoken understanding. One rainy evening, Clara sat by the window watching the rain fall in soft sheets. Milo jumped onto her lap, curling up like he had when they first began their new life together. She held him close, her cheek resting on his soft fur. "You know," she whispered, "I think we're ready. Ready to start truly living again. Not just surviving, not just remembering, but living." Milo purred in response, a low, steady sound that vibrated against her chest. It was the kind of purr that spoke of certainty, of trust, of courage. Together, they began small projects to expand the cafe. A tiny herb garden was planted outside, using the seeds Mama had left behind. Milo would sit nearby, supervising each planting session with solemn dignity, occasionally batting at a leaf or chasing a drifting petal. Inside, Clara added little touches: fresh curtains, a small bookshelf with community donations, framed photographs of her mother interspersed with images of Milo. The cafe was becoming not just a business, but a living tribute, a place where memory and present blended seamlessly. The community began to notice. People would drop by just to see Milo, just to feel the calm warmth that radiated from the little orange cat who had survived so much. Parents brought their children, telling stories of resilience and care. Older neighbors came to share memories, tea, and quiet conversations. One day,
A local journalist came in, intrigued by the story she had heard of the cafe and its tiny feline guardian. She asked Clara about Milo, about the inspiration for opening the cafe, and how a small orange cat had become the heart of the neighborhood. Clara smiled, thinking back on all the months of grief, struggle, and quiet rebuilding. He saved me, she said simply. He stayed when no one else could. He reminded me of love when I thought I'd forgotten how it felt. And in doing so, he reminded everyone else too. Milo, sitting on the counter beside her, blinked slowly at the journalist. His golden eyes seemed to convey a quiet dignity, as though he understood the weight of every word Clara spoke. The cafe flourished, not in a flashy way, not with crowded streets and massive business, but in the way that mattered most, in hearts touched, spirits healed, and memories honored. Clara and Milo developed a routine that brought balance and stability back into their lives. Every morning they opened the cafe together, Milo ensuring no one entered unwelcomed, Clara preparing food with care. Every evening they closed together, sharing quiet moments on the floor, in the window, or by the hearth that now burned warmly and consistently. Sometimes, Clara would sit back and watch Milo as he went about his day, supervising the little customers, greeting the regulars, or simply observing the world with patience. She realized that he was more than just a cat. He was a bridge between what had been lost and what could be gained. Milo had become a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a symbol of resilience and loyalty, and as he curled up beside Clara each night, she understood something profound. True love, care, and dedication could transcend even the deepest sorrow. And though her mother was gone, her spirit lived on, in the recipes, in the walls, in Milo, and in Clara's heart. The sun rose higher with each passing day, illuminating the small cafe in golden light. Milo, ever watchful, basked in the warmth, his presence a constant reassurance that they had survived the darkest hours. Together, they had rebuilt life, not as it had been, but as it was meant to be. Quiet, steady, full of love, and full of hope. And in that gentle, steady heartbeat of the cafe, Milo and Clara knew life would continue, memories would endure, and love, the kind that perseveres, would always find a way.
The seasons changed gently, almost imperceptibly at first. Spring gave way to summer, and the cafe, once quiet and tentative, now hummed with life. The familiar chime of the door announced every visitor, and Milo was always ready, leaping gracefully from his perch to greet anyone who entered, his golden eyes calm and watchful. Clara moved with quiet confidence, her movements precise but gentle. She carried the weight of loss lightly now, replaced by a sense of purpose. Every loaf of bread, every bowl of soup, every cup of tea she prepared was infused with the warmth she had learned from her mother. The cafe had become more than a place to eat. It was a haven, a living memory, and a symbol of resilience. People came for comfort, for a reminder of the past, for the quiet reassurance that life could continue even after deep loss. Milo remained at the heart of it all. He had grown a little thicker, his coat shinier, his movements more deliberate. He seemed to understand the rhythm of the cafe, the way people moved, the energy they carried, and he responded accordingly, purring beside those who were sad, rubbing against children, or simply sitting silently with those who needed quiet company. Clara often found herself watching him from the counter, a smile tugging at her lips. "You know," she said softly, one morning, "I think Mom would be proud. You've kept her spirit alive in every corner of this place." Milo blinked slowly, as if to agree. His calm, steady gaze reminded her that even the smallest creatures could carry the heaviest burdens and transform them into something beautiful. The community began to recognize Milo as more than just a cafe cat. Stories spread of the little orange cat who had stayed by his sick mother, who had comforted Clara through grief, who now welcomed everyone with gentle dignity. People came from nearby neighborhoods just to meet him, to feel the peace he radiated, to witness the quiet strength of a heart that had endured so much. Clara realized that Milo's presence had taught her something profound, that healing is not linear, that love does not end with loss, and that caring for another, even a small furry creature, could rekindle hope in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the windows, casting warm stripes of light across the wooden floor, a young couple approached the counter. They were hesitant at first, glancing at Milo with curiosity. "Is he friendly?" the woman asked, her voice soft. Clara smiled. "He's more than friendly," she said lightly, though she knew there was truth in the words. "He's a little guardian." Milo padded over, head high, tail upright. He circled the woman's feet once before brushing against her leg, purring gently. She laughed, and her partner bent down to scratch behind his ears. Milo's eyes closed in contentment. Clara watched them, feeling a sense of quiet pride. The cafe wasn't just a place for food or a tribute to her mother. It was a space where people could reconnect, find comfort, and remember the simple, important things in life: kindness, presence, and love. Evenings were quieter, more intimate. Clara would sit by the window with Milo curled on her lap, sipping tea and listening to the soft sounds of the street outside. The fire would crackle in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. "Do you think she'd like it?" she asked softly, addressing Milo. He blinked slowly, resting his head against her hand. And that calm, patient look, Clara felt the answer: yes. She was doing more than surviving. She was honoring her mother, carrying her spirit forward in every small detail, in every gentle interaction, in every warm smile that greeted a visitor. The cafe became a bridge between past and present. Recipes from her mother were shared with customers, some of whom asked for cooking tips, while others simply wanted to hear stories of Mama's kindness. Milo was always present, a living reminder of the love that had been and the resilience that had endured. On weekends, Clara began small workshops for children. They would learn to bake bread, make soup, and care for small plants. Milo would sit among them, quietly supervising, occasionally batting at a rolling ball of dough or chasing a stray leaf. The children adored him, learning not only the skills Clara taught, but also the gentle lessons Milo embodied: patience, empathy, and the value of quiet presence. Neighbors started leaving notes of thanks, small gifts, and flowers at the cafe door. Sometimes people would sit quietly with Milo, sharing stories of loved ones lost, finding comfort in the soft, steady heartbeat of the little orange cat. Clara often thought about the months of grief she had endured, about the dark days when she had felt completely alone. She had believed the loss was permanent, that the emptiness could never be filled. But Milo had taught her otherwise. "Life finds a way," she said one evening, stroking his fur. "It finds a way through the smallest hearts, the simplest gestures, and the love we choose to carry forward." Milo blinked slowly, settling into her lap. His eyes reflected the soft glow of the fire, calm, unwavering, and wise. As the seasons continued to shift, Clara and Milo established a rhythm that brought quiet joy and stability. They opened the cafe each morning, welcomed customers with warmth, and closed it each evening with gratitude. The small garden bloomed under Clara's care, tended to by her hands and supervised by Milo's watchful gaze. And always, in the quiet moments, they would sit together, the world outside moving at its usual pace, while inside, they nurtured a legacy of love, resilience, and healing. The memory of her mother was never forgotten. It lingered in the recipes, the stories, the walls, and in Milo, whose golden eyes reflected the lessons of patience, courage, and enduring love. Clara had learned something she would never forget. Grief does not vanish, but it can be transformed. Love does not die, it evolves. And the smallest of hearts, even those with tiny paws, can hold the weight of the world and turn it into something beautiful. Every night as she closed the cafe and sat by the window with Milo, she whispered softly, "We did it, little one. We found our way back." Milo blinked slowly, as if in agreement, and in that simple gesture, the two of them, human and cat, knew that they had truly healed. The cafe continued to flourish quietly, lovingly. Every customer, every child in the workshops, every neighbor who came seeking comfort, they became part of the story, part of the living memory that Clara and Milo had created. And in that gentle, ongoing rhythm of life, Milo and Clara understood the most profound lesson of all, that love, care, and patience could transform even the deepest loss into something enduring, meaningful, and beautiful. The sun set behind the cafe, casting golden light across the garden. Milo sat by the window, tail wrapped around his paws, watching the world. Clara stood beside him, her hand resting on his back. Together they watched, and together they lived.
The cafe had become more than just a business. It had become a heartbeat in the neighborhood. It was quiet but alive, gentle but comforting, a place where stories intertwined with the aroma of fresh bread and the soft hum of conversation. Milo, perched by the window, remained the silent guardian, watching as life continued to flow through the doors he had once welcomed with tentative curiosity. Clara moved through the space with ease now, every motion reflecting the lessons she had learned through loss and patience. She had learned how to carry grief without letting it control her. She had learned how to transform sadness into care, absence into presence, and emptiness into warmth. Milo had guided her every step, reminding her with his quiet wisdom that even the smallest presence can make the greatest difference. Evenings were the most serene. The sunlight softened as it poured through the windows, painting the walls with golden hues. Milo would curl up beside Clara as she cleaned the tables or closed the little cash box, his tail wrapping around his body like a thread of reassurance. The fire burned gently in the corner, the scent of lavender from her mother's old sachets still lingering faintly in the air, a comforting echo of the past. Clara often thought about how far they had come. She remembered the dark mornings when she woke to silence so heavy it seemed impossible to bear, when Milo's soft purring had been her only company. She remembered the emptiness, the grief that had clawed at her chest relentlessly, and she realized now that those days, as painful as they had led her here, to this calm, to this connection, to this quiet joy. People continued to visit the cafe. Some came for the food, some for the gentle atmosphere, and many came just to see Milo, the little orange cat who had become a symbol of resilience and love. Children giggled as he chased rolling balls of yarn across the floor. Adults whispered softly to him, seeking comfort in his quiet presence. And Milo, wise and patient, responded to each in his own way, offering solace without judgment, companionship without words. Clara began keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done since her mother passed. She wrote down recipes, memories, and small observations about life and healing. Milo often sat nearby, pawing gently at the pages, as if reminding her that every day was another opportunity to create something meaningful. One late afternoon, a young couple came in, carrying a small, frail kitten. They introduced Milo to the kitten carefully. At first, Milo observed. His golden eyes narrowed slightly. Then, slowly, he approached, sniffed, and allowed the kitten to sit beside him. Clara watched the scene unfold, a smile tugging at her lips. Milo had not only healed her, but was now extending that care to another life. The community began referring to the cafe as a special place, not because of the food alone, but because of the warmth it offered, the memories it preserved, and the quiet lessons it imparted. Stories of resilience and healing, of love lost and found again, spread gently from neighbor to neighbor, weaving the cafe into the fabric of the neighborhood's collective memory. Clara realized that the journey had changed her forever. She had learned to embrace grief without letting it dominate, to honor memories without being trapped by them, and to cultivate love in both big and small ways. Milo had been her guide, her companion, her anchor, a reminder that even in the smallest, quietest forms, love could endure and transform. One evening, as the last light of day slipped through the windows, Clara sat with Milo on the floor, leaning against the counter. She gently stroked his fur, watching him blink slowly in the soft glow. "You know," she whispered, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" Milo responded with a gentle purr, the vibration soft but steady. "And we'll keep going," she continued, her voice soft but full of determination. "For Mom, for us, for everyone who comes here looking for comfort and care." Milo stretched, then settled back into her lap, tail curling comfortably around her arm. He didn't need words. His presence spoke louder than any could. The cafe doors closed for the night, but the warmth remained. Outside, the street was quiet, illuminated by soft lamplight. Inside, the small space held a story of loss, love, resilience, and hope, a story carried forward by a woman and her loyal companion who had both endured the darkness and emerged into light. Clara looked around at the small tables, the shelves with plants and books, the counter filled with fresh bread and tea, and she realized something profound. Healing wasn't about returning to what had been, but creating something new, something lasting, something that honored the past while embracing the future. Milo purred again, pressing his head into her hand. She laughed softly through her tears, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Life, she understood now, would always have sorrow, but it would also have moments of love, warmth, and quiet joy. And with Milo by her side, she was ready for all of it. The cafe's story, the story of a little orange cat, a grieving daughter, and a memory that refused to fade, had become more than personal healing. It had become a living, breathing testament to resilience, care, and the power of small acts of love to transform lives. Clara whispered one last time before turning off the lights for the night. "Thank you, Milo, for everything." Milo blinked slowly, curling up into a perfect little circle on the counter. The quiet hum of the house, the lingering scent of lavender, and the soft warmth of the hearth filled the space. Outside, the stars shone gently, reflecting the light of a life renewed. They had survived the loss. They had rebuilt the home, and together they had discovered that love, steady, patient, and enduring, could heal even the deepest wounds. And in the gentle peace that followed, Milo and Clara slept side by side, the world outside continuing in its usual rhythm, while inside, love endured. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Healing isn't linear, but it's always possible.